Look, I've been a xenobiologist for the Galactic Council for about 200 cycles now, and I thought I'd seen everything. I've cataloged species that communicate through interpretive dance. I've documented civilizations that consider taxation a form of prayer. Hell, I once spent 3 months studying a race that literally photosynthesizes sarcasm. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for humans. Specifically, nothing prepared me for Lieutenant Commander Alexis Chen. According to YouTube analytics, 99.3% of viewers are not subscribed. That's a huge number. By subscribing the channel that is completely free, you'll help support the channel and never miss fresh content. The day everything went sideways started like any other terrible day in space. Our diplomatic vessel, the Harmonious Understanding, which was neither harmonious nor particularly good at understanding anything, had crash-landed on Theta 79. That's not the planet's real name, obviously. Its real name is about 47 syllables long and requires 3 different larynxes to pronounce correctly. The locals called it something that translated roughly to the place where hope goes to file paperwork and then die. Cheerful bunch, those locals. Our crew was a standard diplomatic mishmash. There was Captain Vexilor, a Zentari who looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a particularly judgmental librarian. He had compound eyes that could spot a grammatical error from 3 kilometers away, and an exoskeleton that clicked disapprovingly whenever someone used a contraction. Then there was Navigator Plurix, a blob-like Githrani who communicated through color changes and smelled perpetually like overripe fruit mixed with sadness. We had Engineer Korthax, a 4-armed Brecken who could fix anything except his own terrible personality. And Dr. Silene, a crystalline luminar who hummed at frequencies that made your teeth hurt if you thought about mortality too hard. And then there was Lieutenant Commander Alexis Chen, the sole human on board, who had been assigned to us as part of the Galactic Council's Cultural Exchange Program, which was really just fancy diplomatic speak for, we need to make sure humans play nice with others. Alexis, or Lex, as she insisted we call her much to Captain Vexilor's grammatically offended horror, was exactly the kind of human you'd expect the Earth Defense Force to send on a diplomatic mission. Which is to say, she was completely wrong for it in every possible way. She was short by human standards, compact and muscular, with dark hair that she kept in what she called a regulation bun, but which always seemed to be sprouting rebellious strands by mid-shift. She had these dark eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled, which was often, and which was deeply unsettling to species who considered smiling a threat display. She also had exactly 0 filters between her brain and her mouth. "So," she'd said on her first day, looking around our ship with barely concealed amusement, "which one of you is going to be the alien that learns the true meaning of friendship? Because I gotta tell you, I've seen this movie and it ends well for the uptight commander." Captain Vexilor had clicked his mandibles so hard, I thought he'd crack his exoskeleton. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Back to the crash. We'd been on a routine diplomatic mission to mediate a trade dispute between the Quelix Consortium and the Dravian Empire. The dispute was over fishing rights in neutral space, which sounds reasonable until you learn that both species are silicon-based and neither one actually eats fish. They just enjoyed the philosophical implications of ownership. That's the kind of nonsense we dealt with on a daily basis. Everything had been going fine until an unexpected meteor shower decided to redecorate our ship's hull. In space, unexpected meteor showers are what we call a really bad Tuesday. Our shields failed, our engines went from happily humming to screaming their last will and testament. and Captain Vexilor went through all 7 stages of grief in approximately 12 seconds. Lex had been the only one not panicking. She'd strapped into her station, called out a series of incomprehensible human phrases that I later learned were extremely creative profanity, and then calmly announced, "Well, this is going to suck." We'd crashed on Theta 79 with all the grace of a drunk Githrani at a formal dinner, which is to say, poorly, wetly, and with a lot of apologizing. The planet was classified as marginally habitable, which in Galactic Council speak meant you probably won't die immediately, but don't get comfortable. It had breathable atmosphere, which was nice. It also had carnivorous plants, toxic rain that fell every 6 hours, and local wildlife that considered anything that moved to be either food or a personal insult. Oh, and it was home to a species called the Kirathi. The Kirathi were what humans might call bear-adjacent. They were large, covered in thick fur that ranged from deep brown to silver, walked on 4 legs but could rear up on 2 when they wanted to be intimidating, which was always, and had cubs that made the most soul-destroying crying sound in the known universe. Imagine if sadness itself could scream. Now make it louder and give it teeth. They were also, according to every piece of council data we had, completely nonverbal, minimally sentient, and generally considered a developing species that wasn't supposed to achieve spaceflight for another 1,000 years or so. In other words, we'd crashed on their planet and were bound by approximately 900 different council regulations about non-interference. The crash had damaged our ship beyond immediate repair. Engineer Korthax estimated we'd need at least 40 cycles to get the engines operational again, assuming none of the toxic rain melted anything important, which was a generous assumption. Our communications array had been completely destroyed, turned into what Lex called expensive abstract art. No one was coming to rescue us anytime soon. And our food supplies, those in what remained of the cargo bay, which was now half submerged in a swamp that smelled like fermented regret. We managed to salvage exactly 32 standard ration packs, for a crew of 6 for 40 cycles. Do the math. It's not pretty. Captain Vexilor immediately called a meeting in what remained of our conference room, which was really just a slightly less damaged corner of the ship. He stood there, mandibles clicking in that way that meant he was about to say something everyone would hate, and announced we'd be rationing food at half portions until rescue arrived. "This is unacceptable," Dr. Celine hummed, her crystalline structure pulsing an agitated purple. "My species requires specific nutritional frequencies to maintain cellular cohesion. Half rations could cause me to literally crack. My biology requires constant fuel." Korthax rumbled, flexing all 4 arms in what I'm sure he thought was intimidating, but really just looked like an aggressive stretch. "I cannot work on half rations." Plurix just turned a miserable gray and oozed slightly. Lex had been quiet during all of this, which should have been everyone's first warning sign. When a human goes quiet, something's about to happen. It's like how animals go silent before an earthquake, except the earthquake is a 5'4" human woman with opinions. "What about the locals?" she asked suddenly. Captain Vexilor's entire body went rigid. "What about them?" "Well, they live here, which means they know where food is. We could trade for supplies." "Absolutely not," the captain clicked. "The non-interference directive is clear. We cannot make contact with pre-spaceflight species. It could contaminate their cultural development. We could accidentally become the basis for their mythology. Do you have any idea how much paperwork that generates?" "Right," Lex said slowly, in that tone humans use when they're pretending to agree, but are absolutely not agreeing. So, we're just going to starve on principle. Cool. Great plan. Love that for us. We will not starve, Vexilor insisted. We will simply be very hungry. There is a difference. Yeah, the difference is one letter and several weeks of suffering, but sure. We settled into our terrible routine. Days passed. The toxic rain came and went. We slept in shifts, guarded our dwindling supplies, and pretended we weren't slowly wasting away. Plurix lost all color and started looking like a particularly depressed puddle. Corthax's arms moved slower each day. Even Dr. Celine's usual humming became quieter, more mournful. Lex seemed fine, which was suspicious. Humans were supposed to be fragile, always complaining about their need for regular meals and specific temperatures. But she kept working, kept making her terrible jokes, kept being aggressively cheerful in a way that made everyone else want to push her into the swamp. Then, on the 15th day, we had visitors. I was on watch when I saw them, 3 Kirathi emerging from the tree line. 2 adults and 1 cub, moving cautiously toward our crash site. The cub, which was about the size of a human child, was making that crying sound. That awful, hungry crying sound that bypassed all logic and went straight to the part of your brain that just wants suffering to stop. I alerted Captain Vexilor immediately. We all gathered to watch from the ship's damaged viewports, observing as the Kirathi approached our salvaged supply containers. The adults were sniffing around, clearly curious, clearly hungry themselves based on how thin they looked. We should scare them off, Corthax suggested. Activate the perimeter alarms. No, Dr. Celine hummed. We should observe. This is a rare opportunity to study their behavior. We should do nothing, Captain Vexilor stated firmly. We maintain our distance. We do not interfere. That cub is starving, Lex said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. So are we, Corthax pointed out. Resources are limited. We have our own survival to consider. That cub is a child, Lex repeated, and there was something in her voice that made my skin prickle, which was impressive because I don't have skin, I have scales. A hungry child. It's not our responsibility, the captain said, but he didn't sound certain anymore. The non-interference directive? Screw the directive, Lex said flatly, and she was already moving toward the airlock before any of us could react. Captain Vexilor lunged after her, mandibles clicking frantically. Lieutenant Commander, stand down. That is a direct order. But Lex was already cycling the airlock, already grabbing one of our precious ration packs from the emergency supply locker by the door. She looked back at us, at the captain specifically, and I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before in any species. Humans call it defiance, but it was more than that. It was certainty. Bone-deep, absolute certainty that she was right, and the rest of the universe could go file paperwork about it. Court-martial me later, she said. I've been through worse. And then she was outside, walking toward the Kirathi with a ration pack in her hands and absolutely no survival instincts whatsoever. We watched in horror as she approached. The adult Kirathi immediately went into defensive postures, rearing up on their hind legs, making threat sounds that carried even through our damaged hull. They were easily 3 times her size. Their claws were the length of human fingers. They could have torn her apart without breaking a sweat, assuming they sweated, which I wasn't sure about because I was too busy having a panic attack. Lex stopped about 10 meters away, knelt down in the mud, and placed the ration pack on the ground. Then she did something that should have gotten her killed. She smiled at the cub. Not the threat display smile that most species do. A real smile. The kind that humans reserve for things they find endearing. And then, in clear defiance of every diplomatic protocol ever written. She spoke to them. "Hey there, little one. You hungry?" "Yeah, you look hungry." I know that feeling. Obviously, they didn't understand English. But tone is universal, isn't it? The way she said it, soft and gentle and completely unthreatening, seemed to pierce right through the adults' aggression. They hesitated, confused, probably trying to figure out what kind of predator approaches with soft sounds and food offerings. Lex slowly pushed the ration pack forward, then backed away, still kneeling, still smiling. "It's okay. Take it. It's for you." The cub, driven by hunger and that childlike curiosity that transcends species, took a tentative step forward. The adults tried to pull it back, but the cub was insistent, making little chirping sounds that were somehow even more heartbreaking than the crying. It reached the ration pack, sniffed it cautiously, then tore it open with tiny claws and started eating with the desperation of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. The adults watched, confused, wary, but the cub was eating, and that seemed to be enough to calm them slightly. They looked at Lex, then at their cub, then back at Lex, trying to solve this unexpected equation. And Lex? She just sat there in the mud, watching the cub eat, still smiling that stupid, reckless, completely human smile. Inside the ship, Captain Vexilor was clicking his mandibles so hard I thought they'd fall off. "This is a disaster. This is a complete disaster. We'll lose our diplomatic credentials. I'll be demoted to filing clerk. Do you have any idea what she's done?" "She's being human," I said quietly, surprising myself. "That's not a defense," the captain shrieked. But I kept watching Lex, and I realized something. For all our evolution, all our technology, all our carefully crafted protocols and procedures, we'd forgotten something fundamental. Something that humans, chaotic and reckless and impossible as they were, seemed to understand instinctively. Children are children, no matter what species they are. And hungry children should be fed, protocols be damned. The Karathi finished the ration pack. The cub made happy chirping sounds, its little belly visibly fuller. The adults looked at Lex one more time, made a sound that might have been gratitude or might have been, "We're still confused, but you can live," and then led their cub back into the forest. Lex stood up, covered in mud, and walked back to the airlock like she'd just gone out for a casual stroll instead of potentially starting an interstellar incident. When she cycled back inside, Captain Vexilor was waiting for her, mandibles quivering with rage. "Lieutenant Commander Chen, you are hereby confined to quarters pending formal charges. You have violated the non-interference directive, wasted precious resources, and jeopardized this entire mission." "Yep," Lex agreed cheerfully. "Sounds about right. Do you have nothing to say in your defense?" Lex looked at him, still smiling, still covered in alien mud, and shrugged. "The cub was hungry. I had food. Math's pretty simple, Captain. That is not how resource allocation works. Isn't it, though?" She looked at each of us in turn. When did we decide that protocols matter more than kids? When did we become the kind of people who could watch something suffer when we had the power to stop it? "It's not our responsibility," Korthax repeated, but he sounded less certain than before. "No," Lex agreed. "It's not. But I'm human, and we've got this weird thing where we can't seem to not make other people's problems our problems. It's a whole thing. Very inconvenient. Terrible for diplomatic careers, apparently." She was confined to quarters, which lasted exactly 4 hours before the Karathi came back. This time there were more of them, maybe 24 adults, all carrying things. Fruits we didn't recognize. Roots. Something that looked like meat, but hopefully wasn't. They approached the ship cautiously, laid their offerings near the airlock, and then retreated, watching expectantly. We all stared at the pile of food in stunned silence. "They're trading," Dr. Celine hummed, her crystalline structure flashing in surprise. "She initiated a trade relationship." "She violated protocol," Captain Vexilor insisted, but his voice had lost its conviction. "She saved us," Plurix burbled, turning a hopeful yellow for the first time in weeks. "Humans. Why are they always like this?" I could have explained it, I suppose. I could have talked about human evolution, about how they'd survived their homeworld through cooperation and pack bonding, and this bizarre inability to ignore suffering. I could have cited studies about human mirror neurons, about their overdeveloped empathy responses, about how they'd literally domesticated predators just because the predators looked cute. But instead, I just said, because they're human, they can't help it. Lex was released from confinement, mostly because keeping her locked up seemed pointless. The Kirathi kept coming, bringing food, and eventually they brought their cubs. Turns out, they weren't minimally sentient after all. They were just quiet, observant, and had been carefully avoiding the countless other species that had visited their planet over the centuries. But they'd seen Lex feed their cub, and something about that simple act had communicated more than any diplomatic protocol ever could. It said, "We see you. We recognize you. Your children matter." Over the following weeks, as Engineer Korthax repaired the ship with help from surprisingly handy Kirathi, who were excellent at finding specific minerals, we learned their language. Or rather, Lex learned their language, because of course she did. Turns out they'd been verbal the whole time, just in frequencies most of our species couldn't hear properly. They had names. They had culture. They had poetry, for crying out loud. They'd been watching spacefaring species come and go for generations, always observing, always learning, waiting for someone to actually see them as people rather than specimens or obstacles. And all it took was one reckless human feeding a hungry cub. When our rescue ship finally arrived, Captain Vexilor had to file a report. It was approximately 73 pages long and included words like unprecedented, revolutionary, and technically criminal, but somehow resulted in a positive outcome. He recommended Lex for both a court-martial and a commendation, which I'm pretty sure isn't supposed to be possible. The council decided on the commendation, mostly because the alternative was admitting that their non-interference directive had prevented them from making first contact with dozens of species that were just waiting for someone to treat them like people. On our last day on Theta 79, the Kirathi threw us a going-away party. They brought food, sang songs in frequencies that made everyone's equipment go haywire, and the cubs played with Lex's hair while she laughed and pretended to be annoyed. The same cub that had been crying from hunger weeks earlier brought Lex a gift, a small carved stone that represented family in their culture. The cub pressed it into her hands and made a sound that our translators rendered as mother friend who feeds the hungry. I watched Lex's eyes get suspiciously shiny, which humans do when they're experiencing strong emotions and pretending they're not. She knelt down, hugged the cub, and whispered something I don't think any of us were supposed to hear. "You take care of yourself, okay? Eat all your vegetables. Listen to your parents. And if anyone ever tells you that protocols matter more than people, you kick them in the shin and run." As we lifted off, leaving the Kirathi waving farewell from below, Captain Vexilor sat in his command chair, unusually quiet. Finally, he clicked his mandibles once, softly, and said, "Lieutenant Commander Chen." "Captain?" Lex replied, waiting for another lecture. "Your actions were reckless, inappropriate, and violated approximately 47 different regulations." 48. Lex corrected. I checked. A sound came from the captain then, a clicking that almost sounded like laughter. Humanity is going to be a problem for the council, aren't you? Lex grinned. Captain, we're going to be everyone's problem. It's kind of our thing. And you know what? She was absolutely right. Because 3 cycles later, the Karathi applied for council membership. They were approved immediately, making them one of the fastest species to ever achieve recognized status. They cited their first contact with humanity as the turning point, the moment they realized the galaxy might be ready for them after all. Their representative to the council? The parent of the cub Lex had fed. They gave their first speech in perfect galactic standard, which they'd been capable of learning the entire time, and said something that made every council member extremely uncomfortable. We have watched you for generations. We have seen your ships, your protocols, your careful non-interference. And we have seen you walk past our hungry children to preserve your regulations. It took a human, young by your standards, reckless by anyone's standards, to do what should be natural to all sentient beings: feed a hungry child. If that is what humanity brings to the galaxy, chaos and compassion and the inability to ignore suffering, then perhaps your protocols need examining. The council didn't know what to do with that. They still don't. But I do. I've watched Lex and other humans I've met since then, and I've realized something that the council doesn't want to admit. For all their chaos, all their recklessness, all their completely baffling decisions, humans understand something fundamental that we've forgotten in our evolution toward civilization. Being right isn't about following protocols. It's about feeding hungry cubs, even when it costs you. It's about looking at suffering and deciding that your comfort matters less than someone else's pain. It's about being so aggressively, obnoxiously, wonderfully compassionate that you'd rather face a court-martial than let a child go hungry. That's humanity. That's their strength and their madness all wrapped up together. And the galaxy is better for it, regulations be damned. I still see Lex sometimes, on other missions. She's been promoted somehow, despite or maybe because of her tendency to cause interstellar incidents. She still feeds things she shouldn't, bonds with creatures that want to eat her, and makes decisions that give commanding officers stress disorders. Last I heard, she'd adopted 3 different species of endangered fauna, started a relief organization that operates in non-council space, and was being investigated for allegedly teaching pre-space flight species how to build water purification systems. When I asked her about it, she just grinned and said, "They were thirsty. I showed them some basic engineering. Math's pretty simple." Humans. They're absolutely going to drive the council insane. And I, for one, cannot wait to see what they do next. Because if the cubs are hungry, the humans will feed them. And if you try to stop them, they'll feed them anyway and make you feel bad about your life choices while doing it. That's just what they do. And honestly, the galaxy's been following protocols for 10,000 years. Maybe it's time we learned something from the species that can't seem to walk past a hungry child without making it their problem. Even if it means rewriting every regulation we have. Especially if it means that.